introduce you to Michelle Perry today. And Michelle is she's a Christian, she's a writer, she's a life coach, and she's a blogger. She's a speaker, and she's a motivational speaker, and she's the owner of Successful Diligence, which is a self-development company. And she wrote a book called The Pebble in My Shoe, and she's going to talk to us about how she came to write her book. Her book is all about living in the power of attention and taking back your power and living in a better way and kind of focusing, getting the right focus. And I can recommend it because I'm about halfway through it at the moment and I'm really, really enjoying it. So Michelle, I'm going to spotlight you now, and you've got, let me just make sure that you do have the ability to, that you are a co-host. You are a co-host, so you've got the ability to share. So I just need to spotlight you now. And then you can.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds exciting.
It'll make you big, and it'll make you big. And, yeah, there you are. Hey. Okay,
hello.
over to you, Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Hi. I have to say, I feel so welcome and connected already. I've never met any of you before today, except for Jane, who I had a pre-conversation with. And I just want to say, you all are incredible human beings. I just feel the love and the light and just, it's just wonderful to be in this room, in this space with you. So I'm going to try and share my screen because I've got a slideshow prepared. And what I'm going to do, it didn't work. So you're going to see it.
We can see it.
You can see it, but I'm going to have to like look over to my left to look at the slide that I'm talking about. So you'll see me looking back and forth. So I'm not being weird. It's just I'm looking at the slide. But if you can see the slide, that's wonderful. It should say the journey to purpose. And the reason I titled this The Journey to Purpose is because my book is the culmination of an assignment from God that I was being very rebellious about and didn't want to write, because the book is about, yes, the power of attention, but how I came to understand that was through a lot of trauma, grief, and loss that I'm going to share with you all, because you are so special enough to get the insider scoop, to get a little bit more context about some of the things that I touch upon in the book, but don't go into detail. So, let me go over here. Okay, so what I'm going to cover is give you a little bit of context and background about who I am as a person. I'm going to talk about 2 identity crises in my life that led to my purpose in life and how I show up in life. We're going to talk about briefly paying attention to others, paying attention to self, because that is what my book is about, the power of attention. And what does that even mean? And we're also going to talk about purpose and process, and then some takeaways, because I'm very, very passionate about having something that is applicable when you are learning something, growing, connecting with people, to have something that you can actually take away and apply to your life. I also like to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. And when I talk about purpose, it's about what you do with your experiences, not why did it happen. A lot of people, when they think about purpose, they think, well, why did this happen? And that's the purpose. When I talk about purpose, it's about what are you doing with what happened to you? And that's the purpose of it, because I believe that all things happen for a reason and a purpose that is ultimately beyond ourselves. And we all have gifts and talents in us that need to be released and gifted to the world. And that's why we experience what we experience, not necessarily for us, although sometimes the lessons are for us, but oftentimes the lessons are to share with other people, to encourage, equip, and just support others on their journey towards living a life that they actually enjoy living, and living a life that they ultimately were born to live. So just wanted to give that as well. So this is my official bio, all the fancy words, and I'm not going to stay too long on this screen because Jane did a wonderful job. I will just highlight that I'm biracial. My mother is Jewish. My father is Black. My father did leave my life when I was 3, and I don't know if you hear my dog sneezing in the background, so forgive that. I have dogs, which you'll see. And that was very impactful for me. Being biracial was a very defining experience for me, as well as growing up without a father, because that contributed to a lot of behavior choices and consequences that I had to live through. I spent a lot of my life failing in a lot of areas, academically, socially. I had a lot of trauma and grief associated with that. And I really had a lack of purpose. And we'll talk about the moment where I was given the gift of purpose in one of the most traumatic experiences that I've ever lived through. And then I went on, and you'll see the successes at the bottom there, all the things I do, which is different than who you are, but such as that. Okay, context. You see these pictures of my family. And on the, I think it's the right-hand side with the babies, I am on the bottom left of the baby picture. And I've got a cousin who is 3 weeks younger than me. And we grew up together. I lived sort of like a foster child because my mother had to work as a single parent. I lived with my grandparents, who you see in the picture. And as you see in the middle picture, I'm the one in front in the red with the afro. And I don't look anything like any of my schoolmates. I don't look anything like my family, really. I sort of fit in, but I sort of didn't. I always knew I was different. The picture, but with the beautiful background with the ocean, that's my family at my grandfather's 95th birthday party 5 years ago. And you'll see I'm the only brown person there. And the picture above that is my cousin's bar mitzvah. And as you see, I'm the only brown one there. And I don't really look like anyone in my family. My mother's on the opposite side of the picture, which is very indicative of our relationship. There was a lot of space between us. There was a lot of disconnection. And so that's sort of the context of my childhood. I didn't fit in. I didn't feel worthy, self-esteem issues, all of those sorts of things. And this went on. I grew up, as I said, in a all Jewish community. I finally convinced my mother to send me to public school, and I saw people who looked different than me, but I was still thinking, well, I'm white, but I'm Jewish, because that was my identity, right? I'm Jewish. No one talked about race in my family. I asked my mother if I'm Black, and she told me I was tan, and I didn't understand what tan meant because who talks about being tan? And so, as you can see, I continued to grow up and look different. A lot of people thought I was Puerto Rican or from the islands or some exotic place or Egypt, but never what I really was. And the girl that you see in the pictures on the right, her name is Susan, and she was my best friend. And she lived life unapologetically. She showed up and did whatever she wanted to do, whenever, wherever, with whoever she wanted to do. She taught me rebellion. She introduced me to some very poor life choices that I had to experience, trauma and consequences from. And she was pivotal in helping me understand that the world saw me as something different. And in high school, I was 14 years old, and I had an identity breakdown where I recognized that the world saw me as a Black person, and I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know who I was. And it threw me into a spiral of the opposite of purpose. I didn't know why I was here. I, was very depressed. I was grieving the loss of who I thought I was and what that meant. I, shifted to the whole other side of, well, I'm mixed, but I'm Black now, and forget the white people, except that meant my family and so all the confusion of being a teenager. And then January 2nd, 1992 happened. And I will always remember this day because it was the day that I was introduced to death. And I was introduced to death in my second period English class, where a boy who I'd known, for all of my academic career, nobody understood him. Nobody paid attention to him. Nobody talked to him. He was weird. He was either going to become Bill Gates or a psychopath. You never know. And on this day, he decided to make sure that although we never paid attention to him, that we would always remember him. And he took his life in our second period English class by drinking a cup of poison. And as they ushered us out of the room, I was the last one to see him. And I saw life leave his body. And the reason that this day was so pivotal, in addition to being introduced to death, was I was also introduced to rage. because the way that everyone responded to his suicide was to celebrate his life, to plant trees in his name, to name the gym after him, to talk about him in a way that was maddening to me, because we never paid attention to him when he was alive. And if someone had given him a word of encouragement, if someone had let him know that he was seen or heard, he might have made a different choice. And so on that day, I was rageful, even though I didn't understand it, because that's how I was processing grief, right? And grief is a messy process. We think it's going to be the roadmap where it's, you know, nice with the little arrow, and you go through the stages of grief very nicely, but no, it ends up being that big ball of mess, right? And that's what happened to me. I had to understand through years of processing that I was experiencing grief as rage, not at the one who took his life, but at us, because we did not pay attention to him. And what that did was it catapulted me into a life of service. I went into, I forget my I forget my slides. I went into a life of service, and the lessons that I learned were that perception matters. You know, in terms of my racial identity crisis, it matters how you perceive yourself and how you perceive others. And why you feel what you feel, the root of the emotion matters as well. Because when I was feeling rageful, I was acting out behaviorally, not understanding that the rage was actually connected to my purpose, because it's what you do with the experiences, right? Is what I said in the beginning. And so what I chose to do in college, once I understood that I was grieving and that the rage was coming from a place where I could do something good with this horrible traumatic experience that I went through, that I conquered it and went through. I didn't let his experience deter me, but I turned it into a passion for paying attention to other people. To those children and teenagers who no one pays attention to. In the United States, you know, the foster care and adoption system is very broken, and there's a lot of kids who slip through the system. And so I went into that field to catch as many of those kids that I could, to pay attention to those kids who were doing so well, but acting out in ways that were destroying them, to pay attention to those kids who were forgotten, to pay attention to those kids who were so broken that people gave up on them. And that was what I decided to dedicate my life to. And I spent 20 years in that field. And I realized that when you pay attention to someone else, you literally can save their life. That attention is life-giving to some people. And even if it's only for a season, it makes a difference. And I realized that service to others is a way that God can use you to impact other people's lives. But while you're serving and while you're giving, you're also benefiting from that service, because you are learning things about you, about the other person. You are sacrificing your time, yourself, your gifts. And it's a blessing to be a blessing to someone else. And so those were the lessons that I took from that crisis. So now we move into these beautiful pictures, right? And what are these pictures representing? And I'm showing you pictures to give you the stories, right? But also for visual learners to connect, and also to let you look at my cute little dogs. So the picture in the top left corner, which is the white family with the girl and the boy, those are my aunt and uncle and my cousins. And in college, when I was going to college and graduate school for social work and clinical service and child welfare, I was also helping to raise my cousins, those two beautiful kids on the end of that table, who are now adults. I did everything but birth them and breastfeed them. Everything else I did. And so I was cousin mom, and it was a beautiful thing, but I sacrificed my 20s for that. And I wasn't happy about it all the time. I look back now and I'm grateful to have been there for them, but it wasn't a time of joy. And parenting is hard. You know, for those of you who are parents, you know, and for a 20-year-old, when it's not a child that you birthed, but you're doing everything else, it's challenging. But it was in my 20s that I also gave my life to Christ. And that girl, Susie, who it was in that first picture. She was the one who brought me to church, and she was the one who introduced me to Christ. And so it's interesting, she introduced me to all of those maladaptive behaviors and ways of living, but she also introduced me to this beautiful life of salvation. And I'm ever so grateful for that journey. I also met my husband, who is the gentleman on the upper right corner, and the one with me and the dogs. And we met online, we met in person, and got married in 90 days when we were age 32. And that's a recipe for disaster if you don't have Christ. Let me just tell you, because that first year was really hard. We were getting to know each other. We were learning that we didn't necessarily like each other, but we were brought together for a purpose. And we're now 14 years married. We're still together. Life is beautiful, right? And there was purpose in that, because what I did with the unhappiness was I learned and I grieved and I kept walking. And that's something I always say. I wear it on my wrist as well. Keep walking. When I was 32, on the bottom right corner, you'll see the man in the green striped shirt. That's my brother. And I never knew I had a brother because my mother never talked about a brother. He is from my father's side of the family, and he found the divorce papers and then found me within 2 weeks of finding those papers. And we met in person with my mother present, who is the woman above that picture, at age 32. And my mother kept a lot of secrets. And there were years that my mother and I didn't talk because I was very angry for a long time. And that's another part of grief, right? That anger. And we have a better relationship now. And I had to implement boundaries and be unapologetic about that. And that season of my life was part of the season when I learned gratitude. And gratitude changed my life. And gratitude lowers cortisol. There's all these benefits that I listed here, right? It creates purpose from stress, meaning that it gives you a way to do something with the stress that you're experiencing. It allows you to focus on others, because when you have your cup full of acknowledging what is going well in your life, you can then give out to other people. And it also gives you a new narrative to tell yourself, a new perspective on life, a new way to look at the world, new glasses to put on. And, gratitude is so powerful because it impacts your physical, your body with the hormones and lowering the cortisol. It impacts your mental, capacities because it shifts your brain. It also rewires your neural pathways and releases new positive dopamine hormones and serotonin and those good feeling hormones in your brain. Then there's that behavioral impact that gratitude has as well, where you're able to be of service to others. And then the spiritual impact, where you actually can create purpose from the stress or from the what people call negative. I don't experience negative in situations, but those things that are not comfortable, those challenges in life, there's purpose from them because we can do something good from our experiences. I also learned that as I began to balance out my racial identity, as well as my faith identity, because my family didn't understand what this whole Christian thing was, because you're Jewish, I don't get it. And I had to re-educate people on my definition of self. And I had to be unapologetic with that and say, this is who I am. You can agree or disagree, but I'm going to show up in truth, because there's no other way to show up in life except for truth if you want to have an impact for good on other people. And I do. I learned about the sacrifice versus the burning, because in this experience in my 20s and 30s, what happened was I gave so much to so many other people that I ended up burning out. And my husband said to me in 2013, you are crazy. And I don't know who you are, and I'm stuck with you for life, so you need to figure something out. And I did not like that message, the package of the message. I didn't like that. And oftentimes in life, we get messages in packages we don't like, but the message was needed, because what I realized was I wasn't being good to anyone else because my cup was empty. And I learned that I have to fill my own cup in order to be able to serve effectively. And that is a lesson that so many of us need to learn, is that we've got to prioritize taking care of ourselves, paying attention to us so that we can pay attention to other people. And that was a key that it was life-changing for me. Paying attention to myself, being mindful, being grateful, self-care, understanding why I'm feeling what I'm feeling, understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing, paying attention to all of the messages that are coming to my life and why they're coming is so important, so that I can be of service to others and that I can help others connect with the gift of who they are to release to the world, because everybody has a message, everybody has a gift, a talent that needs to be released in the world. And then I also learned about keep walking, because there are so many times I wanted to give up. And the message that God gave me was keep walking, just keep walking, show up and keep walking. And in my walk, I've been able to understand purpose, and it was revealed to me as I kept walking. And so with that, this is the pivot. So this is all the things I do, the speaking, the podcasting, the events. I've got an online school, all the different things, right? That was what I did with my purpose, is that I said, I'm going to give these lessons and I'm going to share with the world. And then in 2020, I interviewed a woman on my podcast. Her name is Emmy. And she talked about imposter syndrome on my show. And then after the show, she began to talk about her challenge of writing a book and how you can get your book published, and you got to tell your story. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great, whatever. And this little Vietnamese woman living in the UK at the time followed up with me every week until I said yes. She wore me down. She said, you've got to write this book. I don't know why. I just feel like you really need to be part of this challenge. You've got to do it. And I said, oh, but it's too expensive. Oh, but I don't have the time. Every excuse in the book I came up with. And this woman, and I believe God used her, and I don't think she's a believer, but I think God used her to tell me that you need to write this book, or I'm going to give this assignment to someone else. And that scared me, because I wanted to live a life where I would get to the end of it and be empty, because I gave out to all that I had inside me to give, I gave it out. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm scared. I don't understand, but I just signed up. She gave me a payment plan that was just incredible. And it really, the path was laid open, and all I had to do was show up, do the work, and keep walking. And so in 4 months, I wrote the book, I self-published the book and released it. And it went #1 in 3 countries and 5 categories on Amazon, which was unheard of to me. I didn't, I learned how to do that, but it was incredible. And then the feedback that I started to get from the book and from the reviewers helped me understand why I needed to write it, because there are people needing to hear the message that only you have, right? And so there's people that were waiting for me to show up and share what I've shared in the book about the power of attention, and how do you live a life that you actually want to get up for on a Monday morning, and how do you take what you've lived through and turn it into purpose by what you do with it, right? And so it was very exciting. The Pebble in My Shoe, Take Back Your Power and Live in a Better Way is the name of the book. It is available on Amazon. And it also catapulted a network. Like, I never would have met Jane and all of you if I hadn't written this book. I never would have met the 120 guests that I've had on my podcast from all over the world. And we were counting continents earlier, and all of those continents are included in the people that I've met if I hadn't written this book. So there's opportunities for exposure, for impact, when you actually say yes to the assignment of your life and connect with people who are waiting for you to show up. And so the key points as I start to close that I really want you to take away from what I've shared are that paying attention saves lives, not only the lives of others, but also your own life. Because I was headed down a path in life that would not have ended well. And when I started to pay attention, I was able to saved my life, really. And I don't mean in the spiritual sense, because obviously only Christ can do that, but I was able to start walking the life that I was supposed to be walking, that I was born to be walking, because I was using all that had happened and shifting that into purpose. I was living in a truthful way. And sometimes what I've learned about people is they don't tell the truth. But what people who need to hear your message and who need to hear or meet you, they need the truth, because that's what is going to resonate with them. And so when we live in a way that is value-based, right, and that is in truth, that's where the impact and the meaningful connections come from, is when we tell the truth. And that's what people want, is the truth. That's what people need, is the truth, and being unapologetic about it, because you are the only one, I am the only one that can walk my journey, that can walk your journey. We're all individual, like our fingerprints. And so even if people are doing the same thing or saying the same message, the way that you deliver it, the way that you've lived it, no one else has that. And so that's the special secret sauce that every one of us has to give and offer the world. And it's really important to implement the power of attention. And we do that through boundaries as well. Self-care, as well as balancing those relationships with other people with boundaries. Boundaries is a good thing, even if it doesn't always feel good. And your voice matters. You know, I always tell people that you are so special that you made it to the earth out of those billions of sperm that had the opportunity, right, to meet the egg, and whatever the percentage of chance that it is that we are actually conceived, you made it. You're here. That in and of itself makes you worthy, makes you valuable, and tells me and everybody else that you're here for a reason, and someone needs to know you, someone needs to see you, someone needs to hear you, because what you have to offer and say matters. So I am so, so grateful that I was invited to talk with you, to meet you all. And that's what I have to offer and give. I'm open for questions. I just want to thank you for the honor of sharing space and for allowing me to share. And I am done speaking.